Listening last evening to the president speak about a very different world than what data are showing or anecdotal evidence are showing. And you start to get this push and pull here where it's very difficult to tell people how they feel. What did you make of the rhetoric last evening?
Well, as your setup for our conversation underscored, I think the president is making just a foundational, fundamental error here by trying to tell people they're better off than they think, really than they know they are. Now, he mentioned the gas price. It's not $2 a gallon. It's $3.08 a gallon this morning, and that's exactly the same price it was a year ago. It's actually $3.07, and so not much there. Now, I think the thing that's going on here is that President Trump often is able to persuade his followers of his reality, even if that reality isn't backed up by the facts. But I feel very firmly that that particular superpower of this president, who really is an effective communicator to his followers, simply doesn't work when it comes to affordability. We certainly saw that result at the polls with the affordability election a week ago today, and I'm sure that the kinds of comments he was making last night are going to do him more harm than good when it comes to that very issue.
Well, affordability isn't about any one item, one issue, and President Trump was asked about one potential proposal last night in this interview when it comes to a 50-year mortgage. We want to play you a little bit more sound because Fox News pressed him on it as he's getting some pushback from some of those in his own base.
It's not even a big deal. I mean, you know, you go from 40 to 50 years, and what it means is you pay something less from 30, that some people had a 40, and then now they have a 50. All it means is you pay less per month. You pay it over a longer period of time.
The idea is light on details, but Jared, is this the direction of travel we're headed in when it comes to attempts to lower monthly payments? I'm wondering how you would jumpstart the housing market and the impacts that we could see from the economy if a proposal like this went into place.
Let me give you some interesting information on that, unpacking that important question. First of all, on this 50-year mortgage idea, it's being lambasted pretty broadly. And I did a calculation this morning. I revved up the old spreadsheet just to see what happened. If you look over the course of a 30-year versus a 50-year mortgage, I think you have to kick up the mortgage rate a little bit because lenders will ask for a little bit more for locking up 50-year loans. You're literally paying over $300,000 more in interest over the life of the loan. So, yes, you might pay a little bit less on a monthly basis, but over the life of the loan, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars more on interest. But there's a broader point here. I think that the Republican Party in general, and President Trump specifically, have really lost any policy chops when it comes to affordability policy. It's actually fairly gnarly stuff. You really have to roll up your sleeves and get into the analysis. You can't have Director Pulte of the FHFA come in and say, here's a great idea, and then 10 minutes later, as I believe you've reported, the president goes out and says, new idea. Same thing with his stimmies, these $2,000 stimulus checks to offset the effects of the tariffs, which, by the way, he claims don't have price effects. Same thing with their health savings account, which is really just a tax shelter for wealthy people, not a health insurance program. So they really have a problem in that their muscle memory for affordability policies is quite unutilized. And I think there the Democrats have an advantage. And again, I think you saw that in the election.
You ever meet anyone or know anyone who had a 40-year mortgage, Jared? I heard the president saying that some people are paying 40. That would be would that be a qualified mortgage, or are those available commercially?
They were for a time, and then they weren't. So you might find a few people who have them. But by far, the most common mortgage is, of course, the 30-year FRM, the fixed-rate mortgage. And by the way, it would take legislation to implement a 50-year mortgage. I don't think this is going anywhere. I think this is some stray voltage, the idea of the day. But my broader point is I do think they're flailing here, and I think they'll continue to do so. By the way, I didn't answer the very good question of, well, what the heck would you do if you wanted to deal with the housing market? And here I'm going to give you a little bit of a lead, which is that very shortly, I think next week, the Center for American Progress, where I'm a policy fellow, I might even be a distinguished policy fellow, that just means you're old, where I'm a policy fellow, will be releasing a housing a document on housing policy, wherein we have numerous ideas that have been, again, we rolled up our sleeves and got into the weeds, but we have ideas that should significantly reduce the cost of both home ownership and rentals. So that's a little bit of a tease for something coming out next week.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we want to ask you about another one of President Trump's proposed policies, including this potential $2,000 rebate check tied to tariff revenues. We know that rebate stimulus checks would have to be approved by Congress. I'm wondering how feasible you see this being and what that impact would be on the broader economy if it even gets approved.
I think it would be a heavy lift for Congress. Even Republicans, when they see the price tag, I think would balk. There were numerous analyses out yesterday showing that almost any way you cut it, this idea would absorb well over what the nation is collecting in tariff revenues right now, which is something in the 200 to 300 billion a year amount in terms of, the revenue collections from the customs. Remember, contrary to a lot of what the president says, the folks who pay the tariffs are the importers, the American companies that are importing these these goods, and that's why it shows up in our national accounts. And the stimulus checks to allegedly offset the costs from these tariffs, and there are real costs there. They are juicing inflation, particularly of imported goods, would swamp the amount of revenue, even though that's substantial revenue. This is a very expensive promise. So I doubt it would occur. I also think you have to be concerned about the Federal Reserve. I mean, they're kind of on a knife's edge there in terms of balancing a weakening job market and higher prices. They're looking at a nascent stagflationary environment. I think you'd be fighting the Fed big time if you tried to implement this policy.
Just about a minute left here, Jared. We started by talking about this ADP report, and as we see continued cooling in the job market without the benefit of monthly BLS data, I just wonder where your head is on this. The Fed is kind of flying blind until the government can start churning out monthly job reports again, but this was a trajectory already in place. Where's the job market going to be a couple of months from now, and are you worried about this continued contraction?
I definitely am concerned about it, and I wrote about it this morning on my Substack about precisely this question. The title of my piece was, "Are Layoffs Accelerating?" And I concluded, based on a lot of private sector data, ADP, but one bit of public sector data, which is unemployment insurance claims, they're still coming in, that it does look like layoffs are accelerating, but the trend is quite mild. So maybe flashing yellow, definitely not flashing red, and that's a maybe on the yellow. I do think the unemployment rate is probably ticking up, and I would guess by the end of the year it's a couple of, which is next month actually, it's a couple of tenths higher than it is now.